On behalf of NVIDIA, I want to welcome you all to this event. Thank you for taking time out of your morning and coming to this event. There's a good question to ask, why are we having this event and why now? So artificial intelligence is perhaps the greatest technological transformation, at least in my lifetime, and I've been working for a long time. The pace of the way the models are changing, the way the number of parameters that models process, and the underlying hardware and servers is something that we've never seen before in the computing industry. Makes it really hard to figure out where things are going to go and to predict the future. We also have the overplay of geopolitics. For a long time, the U.S. has been the sole superpower, unipolar force in the world. But now we're being challenged as never before, both economically, militarily, and cultural influence by China. And you've heard things said about China that they just copy things, they steal IP, they don't innovate, the only innovations come from the US. Well, that's just not true. China leads the world in a lot of different areas, including in technology areas. Take a look at drones and solar panels and electric vehicles and batteries and hypersonic missiles. China also has a strong force, a national interest in developing AI. So we can't take that lightly. We have to not underestimate what China can do. And then the other thing that's going on is we've had our series of Sputnik moments. Started with DeepSeek. They introduced a new model, a new reasoning model, and that's been surpassed by Alibaba's Gwen. And look at what Huawei is doing. Their 910 Ascend series, they have the B, C, and D chips. They have a Cloud Matrix 384. They put 384 GPUs together in a big system, and it behaves as one big unit. They introduced a new memory standard that's 10x faster than the old memory standard. And then their CXMT, they announced mass production of HBM3. And then there's SMIC that has a mass production of 7 nanometer process technology and working on 5 and 6 nanometer technology. And then once the H20, the NVIDIA H20 chip got restricted, guess what happened to the GPU market in China with indigenous developments? Cambricon's financials went through the roof as their stock price did. More Threads and Biren are set to go IPO. And then just this past couple days, both Baidu and Alibaba introduced new chips that they're using to train their models internally, and they're said to outperform the H20. And then finally, if you look at the open source models, of the top 10 that are most downloaded in the world, the majority now are from Chinese firms. So that lays out China's strategy. They have these pieces everywhere that they're going to try to take over the whole stack, the whole technology stack. And then you look at China in terms of the AI developers. Half of the world's developers of AI are in China. So if you try to exclude all that from the US technology stack, we would be in trouble because half the world's developers and most of the open source models will be built on an alternate platform if we don't have our technology stack even in China. So it's important to balance national security and economic interests because in the end, the strongest economies also have the strongest military. So the plans we put in place now, the plans we develop, that will set the tone for the future. So let's work together to try to set the right policies in place so we have a good chance to win this war. And with that, again, thank you for coming, and I want to introduce Steve Clements, who will be kicking off the program.
Thank you, Michael. And I want you all to know this is Michael Lutz. He's very modest. He did not want to tell you who he is, but Michael Lutz, Vice President of Global Trade Compliance in NVIDIA. And Mike, you're going to be back to talk with me some more about this, right? Yep. Well, great. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Michael. And welcome to our forum today. Oh, I have this. I don't... You trust this? Okay. We're going to go this way. We've got a really action-packed lineup. I'm going to have a lot of conversation with some interesting people. I'm going to try to take some questions from all of you too, because I really appreciate you showing up. I know that not all of you, only some of you work across the street, so I know it's a journey to get down here, but thank you all very much. But let me welcome to our platform Senator Michael Rounds. He's from South Dakota. Come on, Michael, come on up and join us here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, sir.
Now, let me just start for a second. You're on the Senate Committee on Appropriations, and as I understand it, I have a lot of paper here this morning. I just asked you, because it said in my notes here that you were formerly with the Senate AI Working Group, and you just told me something that may be news, sort of disbanded, but you said, hey, we're getting back together.
Yeah, look, we never really disbanded. We just simply have other things we've got to do. But we've put together some ideas, and there's more coming. We still work together. We still talk to one another on it, and all of us still continue to want to try and find that path forward.
Who do you like most in the working group?
Oh, look, let's not even get into this stuff right now, okay? I mean,
who's the smartest?
well, it's not me. I know that. But let me run this by you. Think about it this way. In the United States Senate and the United States House, you have people that are going to be making decisions about the future of our country regarding artificial intelligence and maintaining and winning a race that has no end. And yet none of us are experts on artificial intelligence, and yet we're going to be the folks that are going to be writing laws or interpreting them or trying to modify them. We're also going to be the folks that are going to be trying to figure out where government investment should go with regard to the advancement. And unless we have lots of input and we have lots of people giving us advice and having an understanding of where the direction should go, we're going to be in trouble. And so my opportunity here is to come before you today and to say help. Because if you're not sharing what you know about this with members of Congress, then we're not going to get it. And we're going to get lots of different ideas from different points of view, but unless it's organized and you can see the big picture along with us, we're the folks that are going to, at some stage of the game, make decisions that may not be the right decisions. Right. I don't want to be in that position. We clearly have a role to play, and yet we're going to need lots of help.
So let me ask you a question. I'm not asking this because NVIDIA is our host today, but I'm asking it because it's a headline in the Wall Street Journal. And that was a decision in China, sort of a preliminary decision, to find that NVIDIA had violated anti-monopoly laws and thus would be done this. And it seems to me, I mean, when decisions like that come out, sometimes it's very hard to back up. But I'm interested in what you see as the escalating tension over the high-end chips industry between China and the United States. We just heard from our friend at NVIDIA on how important it is to have U.S. chips, NVIDIA chips, other chips sold into China to create a dependency there. Do you think that's going to happen, given some of China's moves?
There's two thoughts on it. First one is the direction that NVIDIA has suggested, which has merit. And that is, if we're going to be using chips, why shouldn't we be the chip maker and provide it to as many people as we possibly can and compete with anybody else out there that wants to do the same thing? We know right now, an example, Huawei would, in the past, walk into the United States and they would try to take market share away from our developers of technology that went into a lot of our telecommunications. That's created a problem. So why shouldn't we allow NVIDIA and others to market high-end chips around the world? Period, end of story. Somebody's going to do it. The other side of it is, what about the military? And what can we do to make sure that our military always has a better, more access to the best of the chips for that time period in which they are the best? Because 6 months later, they're not going to be. But how do you measure those two? Now, there are other folks that will tell you, quite frankly, that that's not the way to go, and that what we ought to be doing is restricting everything, making life as miserable as we can for China, while at the same time developing it right here and forcing them to prove that they can do it. You're going to have both points of view, and you're going to hear both points of view. I do think that the bottom line is if NVIDIA can compete in the world, and they can actually outcompete China and do it in such a fashion that they make it difficult for China to get into the big process of doing all the chips, then I think maybe NVIDIA is going to come out ahead. But you can't walk away from the other concept that says you've got to restrict that technology from China as long as you can. I don't know how you measure our advancement over China, or in some cases if China has it over us. What I can tell you though is this: in the United States today, there is not a single domain that we, in terms of protecting America, air, land, sea, space, or cyberspace, in which we can win or protect unless we have the best technical equipment available to us, one step above from where our adversaries are at. Today, I can tell you that China, while we would like them to be a competitor, they are an adversary. We have to accept that. And in doing so, you cannot allow them to have the best chips available. That simply is not part of the program.
So you have sponsored legislation that's called the American Science Acceleration Project.
ASAP.
And I'm very ASAP. That's a great acronym, so that's
We
good.
thought it was.
But I want to ask you about this because NVIDIA, one of the most incredible historic companies, has grown up in an environment where it's been ravenous for the best science in the world. It's been ravenous for the best gamers in the world. That's where it came from. Where you had all of these things coming in. You partnered with universities, labs, et cetera. And I'm just wondering, as you and many of your colleagues are thinking about the science agenda in the country, whether or not your act does enough, whether or not we're where we need to be. When you look at India, you look at China, you look at the massive investment they're making in their people and in their science infrastructure, how does America really compare with no BS?
Look, I'm really concerned about it. And I'll just give you an example. There was a Blue Ribbon Commission that was put out a couple years ago by the Department of Defense on AI. It was over 3 years ago. We're not acting on it fast enough. We classified it so deeply that the vast majority of what was on that AI report isn't available even today. But I'll tell you this much. What they focused on was what it could do for America if we win this battle. And all of our space systems, most of our weapon systems rely on artificial intelligence or will be relying on artificial intelligence in order to be faster than the competition. If you want to take out a missile someplace, you'd better have something that responds to a missile in seconds. If in space you want to be able to detect when someone's going to attack one of your satellites, you'd better have the best and the brightest of all of that. And so we get fired up about this thing about national defense, but we forget about the other things that AI will do for us as a country. And I'm going to focus on one thing just for a second, and that is healthcare. Because one item in this report they talked about is what happens if you have a pandemic, or what happens if somebody else is trying to create a pandemic, and how do you respond to it? But along with that, a corollary of that is what happens if you take this and you try to improve the quality of life for mankind, and you start by trying to cure diabetes, by curing cancers. That is a doable thing. And under the report and under the guidelines here, there's a lot of us that believe if we focus the appropriate type of research now, including government funding for the research, a lot of the cancers that afflict us today could be cured within a 5-year period of time. ASAP, what you referred to earlier, is our goal. Martin Heinrich is my partner on it. He's my Democrat colleague. He was part of the AI working group. Yep, sharp guy. Now, if you're talking about the smartest of all of us, that might be Martin. But what we wanted to do was actually to try to accelerate science by a factor of 10 between now and the year 2030. We sent out requests for information all across the AI grouping, and we had 173 responses about how to do it. There were only 3 out of the 173 that didn't believe that it was a doable deal to accelerate science by a factor of 10 by the year 2030. Then we asked, how do we do this? And part of it is you've got to put the money where your desires are. Follow the money. Where are you going with it? But the second piece of it is how do you agentize it? And is it a matter of just simply having large language models? Or do you take it and you go specifically into a particular area that is maybe perhaps directly on biomedical research? And then how do you focus a lot of the dollars on a system that's designed only to work on data sets that are specific to a particular point? Those are areas that I'm convinced we can do great things on a sector-by-sector approach. But the government has got to be involved in promoting it, not necessarily doing it, but promoting it and accepting it and trying to organize it. So I'm getting carried away.
No, I'm glad you are. I've got, sitting in the room, Georgette Mossbacher, former ambassador to Poland, but she's involved as advisor to Homeland Security. Jane Harmon, who's one of the most famous, I call her my favorite national security diva. We have a very diverse room here of people involved in national security, and it's easy to find divides almost any issue. I'm interested in whether AI is compelling enough Because the big debate on AI is guardrails or no guardrails. It's do you anticipate the areas of concern where things can go off the rails in advance or as you're kind of developing the technology, or do you have permissionless innovation that said, hey, China doesn't have those guardrails, India doesn't have those other places don't have. Where do you sit, and can you give us a sense of the temperature in Congress?
I think our concern is, number one, China can move very, very rapidly, but they do it without guardrails, which means people get hurt. But also, privacy gets eliminated. Now, in the United States, I don't think the people of this country want that to happen. And so do we want
So
to
you
advance
don't want to
this quickly?
hurt people.
That's right.
And you don't want to forfeit privacy.
That's right.
So is your formula going to lose?
We hope not, because what we think happens is people, if they know that we're going to do our best to protect the privacy, there's a lot of really, really bright people out there, the entrepreneurs, the creators. Let me put it this way. If you are one of these bright people and you come up with new ideas, patents and copyrights are critical to you. Well, in the United States, we protect patents and copyrights. China, they don't necessarily have that on their record. And in fact, I think as the ambassador told me one time, he says, you have to understand, in our culture, which is 5,000 years old, we don't understand why or how a person can own an idea. Think about that. See, Western culture has said you can have a copyright, you can have a patent, and so forth. Well, if you want to protect those, and this is the place that you want to be, where you know that they're going to be protected. But at the same time, folks that are creating the data sets have to have access to that good information. How do you balance that? How do you protect the copyrights? How do you protect the patents? And yet make sure that it's still out there and available. You can either do it through the courts, which is what's going on right now, or you can, by legislation, say, let's get down and figure out how we're going to agree on how, when you're creating these data sets, how do you use the newest innovations? How do you use the newest ideas? And then what about the fact that if you're using it and you start to create ideas, how do you create a way to protect the information that you've just created using all of these brand new tools that perhaps have created new inventions or new ways, new medicines that other people have not done in the past? If you're in China, you don't get to do that. If you do it in the United States, we believe that we can.
I want to, well, they've just given us some more time. They like you, apparently. You know. So we got a couple more minutes. I do want to get at least one question from the audience, but before I do that, let me ask you, one of the things I often think about when I'm trying to understand the impact of technology or the impact of geostrategic competition or geotech competition in something is to imagine the United States was not a player, that we had somehow lost that battle and forfeited. I'm interested in what you think are both the geostrategic consequences of that, but what are the consequences to us as people if, in fact, we were to lose, as we just heard from our colleague at NVIDIA, the race to China? What does that mean for our world?
I can't imagine, because I've never lived in a world where the United States didn't have the technology.
Well, we kind of, to be honest, we kind of lost the 5G. I would argue we lost the 5G battle. Or maybe it was like Vietnam and it was a tie. I don't know.
For a while, we lost the auto industry, too.
Okay.
But in all of those, we fought back. And in all of those, we had leaders at the top who said, time out, we need to reestablish this. But we also had industries who said, there is a way to do it. And they also came back and said, these are the reasons why, because of our political environment, in many ways, we lost those capabilities that somebody else picked up. You have to, this is not a case of where industry will necessarily lose this. This is entirely a case of where if we don't pay attention at the national level or at the state levels, it's entirely possible that we could push people away from the United States, and that's what we don't want to do.
Excellent. Let's go to Ambassador Georgette Mosbacher. Make it good, Georgette.
Thank you. I'll try. Sir, can you tell me how can we make sure that this is driven by the private sector? We have learned that government can get in the way, quite frankly. We've seen it in the EU and how they have stifled, both in energy and in IT, to incentivize the private sector, protect, and yet protect at the same time. That's a tricky
I love this question because
it's a tricky
where
question.
does industrial policy start and end, right?
All right. And that's really, if we're not careful,
right,
to the point that we're making earlier about China, that
right,
does not have these guardrails, these guardrails that we put up, how high should they be
Right.
before they get in the way of us being competitive? This will not be done at the government level. It will be done at the private sector level.
Right.
And how does the government incentivize that?
Thank you. And before you answer, let's give the mic to Jane, and we'll do this as a twofer. Jane Harmon, former
Hi.
Congresswoman Jane Harmon.
Let me ask the flip side of that question. How can we make government helpful instead of harmful? I was very impressed by your comment about Martin Heinrich. I mean, it's so rare to see somebody of one party praise somebody of the other party. Congress used to play a very constructive role on a bipartisan basis. How can we make Congress, maybe your committee, a player in helping to set guardrails? Because, Georgette, industry, if you want to be competitive, you don't want to give up your advantage to another company unless there is some fair requirement that all companies have to abide by a set of guardrails. So
Right.
it's government playing the right role, not the wrong role.
Senator, don't you think you'd have a good TV show with Georgette
Oh,
Mossbach and Jane
amen.
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 Okay.
Okay, let me
Senator?
answer your last question first. In the United States Senate, it doesn't make the news, but we do lots of things together. We're actually friends. Republicans and Democrats get along. I mean, if you take a look at it and you see who we go to dinner with, who we have prayer breakfast with, who we do Bible studies with, it's Republicans and Democrats together. In the hallway, in a lot of cases in a gymnasium, but look, the message out there, because it does not hit it. The only thing you see are the animosities or the dumb things people say, rather than what happens most of the time, which is Republicans and Democrats get along. We recognize we are Americans first and we are competitors second. So we just don't do a good job of getting that message out. With regard to I think the guide rails are both good and limiting, but I'm going to go in different directions. We have constitutional rights that we will protect, okay? And that's where we start. Our constitutional rights are not going to go away because you introduce AI. If you were doing something beforehand and it was illegal, using AI does not make it legal. If you were doing something legal beforehand, creating a new tool that makes it faster doesn't make it legal if it was illegal before. So AI should not be the impetus that says it is now changed from legal to illegal or illegal to legal. So we start out with that basic premise. But the second piece on this is what would have happened if we wouldn't have had an Einstein walk in and talk to a president or send a message to a president saying, hey, heads up, you've got to engage the
Right.
federal government on a particular item here with regard to nuclear energy. What would happen if today we decided that we weren't going to do any more research and our researchers had to go someplace else to be funded on the basic research that takes time to develop? So we have to include that piece in it. My message is you don't do this to restrict the development. You incentivize it by creating the infrastructure in which new ideas can be created. And so for me, the biggest piece right now is energy. And I'll just say,
They just took time away from you. They didn't like that.
1,300 gigawatts,
Yeah.
and we need a whole lot more in the
Right.
United States very, very quickly. The United States has to develop the energy here or they're going to go someplace else.
Mike, real quick, I have to ask you this in very fast form, and it's probably an unfair question, but I am interested, and I'm always interested, if it is a national security agenda to enhance, preserve, the ecosystem in which an NVIDIA, the world becomes dependent on an AI stack. Are we doing the right things by way of foreign policy, by way of trade policy, by way of economic policy, to make the world to want to buy those chips, to be in that tech stack? Or are you worried there's a conflict between some of our national economic agenda on one side and the other parts of our national economic agenda as well?
I think the most important thing I can tell you is that you have an engaged administration right now. I think the fact that President Trump has clearly understood how critical AI is the most important piece, because as long as the administration understands that this is the wave of the future and that whoever controls the ability to make decisions faster using better data sets, they're the ones that are going to win the long-term battle for the industries that they have. So the most important piece is keep the administration engaged. I think the fact that the president has clearly been engaged himself in this process and is looking at it, that's the most important part. It doesn't mean that we're always going to make the right decisions, but the fact that they are engaged in it means that it's not going to die because nobody's paying attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I hope when you get the AI working group going again, you'll come back and talk
you.
with us. We'd love to. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm really surprised by this. You know, the truth is I didn't look at the program till this morning. And Samm Liccardo is here. Samm is a Democrat from California in the House. He's on the subcommittee on digital assets, financial technology, and artificial intelligence. I have been with Samm in a few pubs late night at London. Samm, it's such a pleasure. Good to see you. Welcome. Samm Liccardo. It's good to see you, man.
Great to see you.
Okay, what happened in those pubs stays there. This is a great old friend. You know, very. You know, he was mayor of San Jose. And many of you may know City Lab, the Bloomberg Foundation, the Atlantic, et cetera, kind of looking at best and promising practices in the kind of urban world, and you were a very big part of all that. But I guess today we're talking about a step above as we kind of look at the consequences of getting, you know, the AI world right. And I'm interested, you know, I don't know, do you and Ro Khanna compete at all on which has the richer district?
No, but we're happy to share Silicon Valley with everyone.
Okay, good. Well, that's a polite answer, but how do you compare against Ro Khanna's district?
We've got the beautiful coastline. You can't compete with that.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Ro's often talking about he's got the highest GDP of any district in the country, and I'm looking for him to be challenged at some level by a fellow Democrat or something. So,
You know, the lines are close. He's just barely got NVIDIA and Apple's headquarters. We'll grab
okay,
this next
well,
time.
that's great.
Redistricting, yeah.
Well, Samm, thank you. I mean, we're talking today about a lot of different dimensions. I mean, it really, I think, you know, as you're also deal with digital assets, which I find interesting. When you kind of look at the topography of global change and what may really change things, I always tell people, you know, the rise of digital currency is like a new mountain range in the world that people have to look at. The rise of AI and what it can mean and the competition over it is another, you know, new huge mountain range in the world. And so topographically, we have to pay attention to different things. And I'm interested, you sit in a party where a lot of your colleagues worry about that future a lot.
Yeah.
Where are you on the worry scale?
Well, you know, my colleagues worry, and the American people worry. 8 out of 10 Americans are concerned that AI is going to displace them from their job. I mean, that is a very significant worry that we need to be leaning in on. On the other hand, look, I come from Silicon Valley. I appreciate the disruptive nature of technology, which is necessary as an engine of economic growth. Yes, there are things that we need to do as government, particularly around, for example, in the case of jobs, investing in people, investing in skills, and so forth. But disruption is part of the process. And fundamentally, successful economies are open economies.
How do you measure success, or how do you measure what the right steps are? You know, I do worry about the upskilling challenge in America, and there is this anxiety out there. And that said, I've just seen amazing stories of how already AI is transforming things, and you're finding a new literacy among people, even incumbent workers. I mean, I've got, this isn't my program, but I could tell story after story where I see this metamorphosis going on. But how do you know when you're winning or losing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you know, from a perspective of American dominance in the tech stack, obviously we want to continue doing what we do so well. Technology, we want it to be American products in the world. But in terms of how it affects our community, our society, look, I think you've heard the expression many times that you may not be replaced by AI, but you may be replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI. And two things can be true. Yes, we've seen disruption. I've got friends who are in companies where they're laying off programmers. We get it. Coding is a skill that can be, that AI can be very helpful and then obviously accelerating. On the other hand, we know that more and more what is demanded for folks in senior roles is to babysit the AI. That vibe coding doesn't just code by itself. We know that it's far from perfect, and inevitably there are hallucinations and everything else, and you need senior folks in there to make sure the AI actually works. So we need to upskill a workforce to understand the AI and make sure we're managing the AI.
Is there any introspection when you sit down with your, you know, I assume all your CEOs in the area are kind of donors too, or you hang out, you talk to them. I mean, I imagine there's some sort of understanding.
They don't have a lot of time to hang out.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of time to hang out. But I'm interested in, we have you here, and I'm thrilled you're here. And of course, Silicon Valley, Alex Karp and other people talk about what a leadership role Silicon Valley does. But I was recently in Switzerland, in Zurich. People don't talk a lot about Zurich. Zurich is becoming amazing AI hub.
Yeah.
I mean, when you kind of look at what's happening there, it's sort of an unreported story. Michael Shepard of Bloomberg's here. He's writing about it. They're getting some. There's Michael. You should go to Zurich, and you should go to all these places. And what's interesting to me is, how do you get these clusters to happen? China, obviously, extraordinarily important. We're talking a lot about China. How did China, which was never supposed to be this successful in anything, Jensen Huang says they're 6 months behind us, he thinks. So I'm interested in whether there is fear among the people you hang with that they've been resting on their laurels, that a lot of the things that put them together are now being mimicked and copied elsewhere.
Well, certainly there's always that fear that drives a competitive marketplace, as it should be. But fundamentally, the way we win, the way America has always won in the past, is through an approach that emphasizes openness. And by openness, I mean openness to talent, openness to markets, openness to ideas and technology. Right now, I fear that we've got an administration and a set of policies that is doing just the opposite. We're building walls. We're chasing our most talented scientists out of the country. I don't know why any immigrant would want to be in the United States right now. And I come from a community where 40% of us are born in a foreign country. That is the secret sauce of our success. We're erecting terrorists. We have unbelievable engagement in markets, government ownership of companies in ways I never imagined. This is not the openness that wins the race. And so we win when we can compete. And we need an open approach to compete well.
What's the literacy level of your colleagues on these issues? And I don't mean just technically on coding and beginning to look at all things, but I think conceptualizing how AI is sort of the new industrial revolution, how it's going to change everything. Do you have people amongst your peers that kind of get that?
Yeah, I think it's probably inversely correlated with age. You have a lot of younger folks who are using AI every day among my colleagues, others who are still figuring it all out. We've been hosting, Mike Herodopoulos and I have been hosting convenings over at the Library of Congress with leading AI thinkers. We're doing one tonight with Dario Amodei to engage in a bipartisan way our colleagues. These are all Frosh, by the way. So this is a group that tends to get it. These are younger members. And I've been frankly impressed by a lot of the questions I'm hearing. I think folks understand where the challenges are and where we need to focus.
Do you worry that Dario's too much of a doomsayer?
Yeah, at times, but look, I think that this is a time when we need a very robust discussion with very different sets of perspectives and ideas. Because the truth is, we don't know what we don't know. And it's okay to hear Dario out there saying exactly what he's saying. Frankly, we need to rise to the occasion to demonstrate how we can have a better future with AI. And that's our work.
So as you work on these groups, and I know you, Sam, you talk across party lines, and I think just as Mike Rounds was saying, there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes between both parties. Yeah. But I'm just interested in whether or not, as you kind of look at, we got the room full of people here at 8 in the morning. It's just, this matters. Whether or not this is a Sputnik moment, whether there is a sense of consequence, a sense of urgency to get these factors right. I also want to ask you about the crypto world. I know that there's issues in there because it may seem like a different topic, but in a way it's not. It's around innovation. It's around thinking differently, and whether or not you think these are boutique discussions or big mainstream heavyweight discussions.
Well, I think it's the latter. Look, this is a Sputnik moment, but it's not just in AI. I mean, look, as we think about, for example, energy storage and renewables, we are losing in a big way right now to China. They are ahead of us. And that is not the only technology. I can tell you, in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of concern in biotech, in chip manufacture, et cetera. NVIDIA is doing a great job, by the way. I'm glad they're still ahead. But we've got a lot of work to do to be able to ensure American primacy because, frankly, we have lost it in many key tech industries.
Do you think California can keep, I was just in Texas moderating a thing with, we had a bunch of tech companies and power companies, a big power company in Texas called Encore, and the data centers. And, this guy who's from Encore was just very bullish. He says, the rest of America is going to fall behind us in Texas because we can permit and get something built and make it happen in 6 months. And so when you kind of look at the ongoing need for power, the increasing size, data centers, which is also part of the story, that if you don't make that happen here, it'll go elsewhere. How is California doing in that race?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things can be true here. Look, the Republicans are right. We've got to get a lot of the red tape out of the way. And, there are abundance Democrats that are embracing this as well. There's no question.
So Sam Liccardo said the Republicans are right.
Well, that was a comma, not a period. That was a comma.
Okay.
Look, we can agree on those things. At the same time, we have to be careful about, while we're racing, what we're racing to. Look, if we want to build out power infrastructure quickly to get data centers up and running, it turns out building out gas pipelines in greenfields is not the secret to doing it. We're probably going to need to accelerate energy storage and renewables. And right now, I can tell you, this Congress this week, this House of Representatives is considering a bill on the floor that would essentially give permitting primacy to fossil fuel generated energy sources in order to get a permit on the grid. Essentially, even if you're ready to go, if you got wind or solar, you're going to be pushed behind a fossil fuel generator, obviously probably natural gas, in terms of the great competition to be able to get these permits. This is not going to help us, right? We can't be ideological about this. If it's really an all-of-the-above solution, I know that renewables can win in the end. We have to be careful about how we race.
Cool. Let me get a question from Michael Shepard, who's he's the best, I'm going to not offend anybody, but the best strategic industries correspondent I know from Bloomberg. So, Michael?
Well, one of many. We're a team there. Thanks so much, Steve, and thank you, Congressman, for your time. I have so many questions. I'll try to limit it to two. I'm going to take
you
take
can
two
use a
here.
hyphen.
Yes, we'll use a hyphen or a comma.
A semicolon.
Congressman, I want you to talk a little bit more about the tension between promoting American technology and protecting it. And Senator Rounds discussed it a little bit, this tension over how far to go with export controls and where should we land. We know this is a debate happening actively in Washington this year with the rescission of the Biden diffusion rule. There's talk of maybe bringing some form of that back on Capitol Hill right now in the defense authorization bill. Where do you stand? Where should we fall in this? And then next to follow, Intel. Is this a good precedent? Do we need to be seeing the government investing more in chip makers and other strategic companies? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
You've got a minute.
So when I said openness and openness to markets, I'm referring tariffs as well as export controls. As well as, by the way, government ownership in companies, which I think is a really bad idea for lots of reasons. So look, I supported the idea of NVIDIA getting the export controls, getting a reprieve to be able to sell their chips along with Intel's. On the other hand, I didn't like the idea that somehow or another we're going to try to extract resources from companies to do it. Because I think the problem is, look, this is a national security issue, and we should not be mixing incentives for revenue generation with national security considerations. There are sound reasons to say that NVIDIA can sell its chips, and if we start deciding that we're going to be incentivized by generating revenue, we're going to make a lot of bad decisions in the future. And yes, that goes for ownership interests in Intel as well.
Let me ask you finally as we wrap up. I interviewed Senator John Hoeven and then Senator Joe Manchin.
I'm sorry, it was AMD that got
you're going to answer the other part.
I'm sorry, on the export controls. My apologies.
Okay. Did you want to finish that?
No, I just mixed up Intel when I mentioned export controls. It should have been AMD. Sorry about that.
I still thought it was a good answer.
All right, thank you.
But I interviewed Senator Joe Manchin and John Hoeven from North Dakota once on how lousy it was being a senator compared to being a governor. It was a hit program. They just loved to be in governor. They didn't. So you were a mayor of San Jose, two-term mayor. You were a great mayor. How does it compare to being a House member?
My wife says that I'm a lot easier to get along with because my decisions are pretty simple now. I just vote no a lot. And when I was mayor, I was actually responsible for things. You go to the grocery store, somebody says, hey, there's a burglary down the street, there's a pothole, or whatever, you actually have to respond. So no, actually I love being a big city mayor. It was a lot of fun. It's the best job in government. But I recognize the imperative of being here in this moment. We've got a lot of work to do.
Do you like Rich McCormick?
I got to get to know Rich McCormick.
Well, we're going to help you meet him right now.
Oh, okay, good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause to Sam Liccardo,
Okay,
Democrat in
fabulous.
California.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Thank
Meet
you.
Rich McCormick.
It's a flip. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Congressman, hey, good to see you. Thanks so much for
pleasure.
joining us today.
If that
We-
wasn't a setup question, I don't know what it is.
You know,
What if he would have said no? Well, just come out here and just rugby tackle him to the
it's
ground.
okay.
Start doing
no,
the
it's
WWE.
okay. You know, I like honesty. I like to know where people are at, so it's good. Thank you so much for joining us. You're from Georgia. You're a House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and you've been one of the leaders in trying to think through what the right policies and kind of ecosystem ought to be for I think, I mean, it's hard to just call this technology. It's like the most advanced of the advanced technology that the world needs. And we've been in a race across not just the Trump administration, but you also saw major investments of the Biden administration in this area. So I want to know from you, how could we really screw it up?
Yeah. There's lots of ways. First of all, we're getting the government in the way. We are not having mass, when you talk about mass investments, we're not doing mass investments. China's doing mass investments. $38 billion in 2023. They have 47% of the AI scientists right now working. They have 50% of the world, now I'm talking about on the world. They have 50% of the AI patents in the world. They are laser focused on everything from securing the energy resources, which is our limiting factor, by the way, and that's one way we can screw this up. We don't have the energy. Look at the parabolic demand of energy in the United States for what we need. We are not prepared. We have 2 nuclear reactors that have been completed in the last 20 years, both of them in Georgia, I might add. And
Why don't you have 4?
Well, the question is, why does the whole rest of the United States have 0? 0 under construction, by the way. If we started construction right now, we won't be ready. If we started today, we broke the ground today, we would not be ready. We are constantly being reactionary instead of proactive, instead of being visionary. This is the problem with Congress. We wait until last second. We're going to go bankrupt in Medicare and Social Security because we didn't look at the future. It's predictable. It's math, guys. This is science. This is so predictable. All the things we need, whether it be in AI development, science, energy production, it's all predictable, and yet we're not doing it. And the problem is because we're so distracted with everything else. We wait until it's an emergency, and this is why presidents claim emergency powers to get things done, because we wait, then it becomes an emergency, then the president has to say, oh, it's an emergency, therefore I'm going to grab power. That's why we're out of balance. That's why executive branch seems like it's way up here, the legislative branch is way down here. We are co-equal in power. We're supposed to be as powerful as the president of the United States. But we've given up our power to the last 3 presidents, in my opinion.
So, Rich, I love your realism, and so I want to ask you, because I can tell you're not a rah-rah guy. You're not like somebody who says, oh, America's always going to lead, always going to be great because we've always been great. You're saying we have to do certain things to stay there. Part of our discussion today is talking about the future of the AI stack, looking at the future of dependency around the world on a system that if we're not out there engaged in such a way that people are using our stuff, that someone else is going to fill that space. Might be Huawei, might be some massive company that comes up. I remember talking to, I won't tell you which Korean chaebol it was, but he said, look, you guys sanctioned the Japanese. We became big in semiconductors because you sanctioned Japan. There are unintended effects in global affairs.
Always.
And so what NVIDIA is sort of interested in is saying, hey, if we don't fill that demand in space around the world, someone else is going to do it. How is that playing in your world?
So let's go back into history. Anybody who hasn't read the book Chip Wars, please read it.
Oh, yeah.
It is brilliant in discussing exactly how the power shift from basically the United States, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China. You could see it evolving based on unintended consequences by governments. If you look at NVIDIA, we recently had the AI diffusion, which I'd like to say we had a big part of getting rid of that, where basically we wouldn't allow NVIDIA or anybody else to sell company chips that were basically mid-grade chips to the rest of the world because we didn't want to share our AI technologies. But it actually worked against us because now we're letting China fill that void and they become the standard. Kind of like when you're going to go the different wars we've had between tape playing, where VHS or Beta or Apple versus Intel. There's always a sentinel moment. And this is kind of our sentinel moment that luckily we kind of hopefully circumvented by allowing NVIDIA and other companies to sell internationally where we couldn't before. And that was actually a Biden administration hamper, the handcuffs basically saying, no, we're not going to be able to do that. We had to be smart. This reaction, I'll give you another example. We have certain people in my own party who believe that states should regulate AI. Well, name one AI invention that can't be interstate, well, that has to be interstate or international. If we have 50 different regulations on AI companies, first of all, it's going to hurt the little guys even more because they don't have it's a $2 million burden per state to get outside of your state with the burden of regulation. You're going to have employees that and it's going to slow you down. If we're slow and we're expensive, we lose. Look at what India just did recently. They put a spaceship on the dark side of the moon for less than $80 million. We can't even build a building to discuss putting a spaceship somewhere for that much. We're losing this race because we're not efficient. In the military aspect, if we look at the way that things are being developed, look at I'm a military professor. I was a Marine Corps pilot for about 16 years, an ER doc in the Navy for about 4 years. Now I'm on armed services, which cybersecurity is a big part of this. And if you look at the future of warfare, if we're not trying to develop these drones and things to be the next level, we have Houthis shooting down 7 of our drones. If the Houthis can do that, what do you think China and Russia are going to do to us? If we have 50% of the Air Force budget wasted while China is basically efficiently putting into the next generation of fighters and supersonic missiles and cybersecurity and space technology, we lose. It's pretty simple and it's predictable. Like I said, we have to be much more visionary.
Go a step further in this, because I look at companies like NVIDIA and the capacity that can bring and be transformative. I don't think I'm outing anything by saying you and I are actually meeting an admiral on Thursday who's the supreme commander of NATO for Allied transformation.
What a cool title, by the way.
Coolest name. He's like
Supreme
a 5-star
Allied commander.
He's like a 5-star guy, an admiral. We're meeting him, and he's responding. So I've been thinking a lot about today's program, NATO, our allies, who's up, who's down, and how the process works. But if you go talk to Alex Karpa-Palantir, you go talk to people in this space, they are pretty dismissive of our Pentagon and how it operates and funds, et cetera, as being slow, sluggish, and they worry about the implications for that if we have real conflict. Yeah. So where are you in that?
Well, luckily,
and what are you going to tell the admiral in NATO?
Well, luckily we have some really good admirals and generals right now. Admiral Paparo, who's Indo-PACOM, is phenomenal. He's one of the brightest minds around. General George, who's Army Futures Command, phenomenal mind. He actually sees where the waste, fraud, and abuse is. Chairman Rogers is really good at identifying the problems with the way we contract. We have the right people in the right place right now. We just need to get it done. But getting past this bureaucracy, this slow-moving, just resisting, they resist all change. And we as Americans, we hate 2 things. We hate the way things are, right? We don't like the way things are. We always want change. And then we also hate change. There you go. And there's the problem. There's the dynamic, the duality of mankind, if you will. So we're constantly resisting. If you're in a government job, anytime you have change, it makes you work harder. So just self-preservation-wise, you just want things to stay the way they are. And you'll see that people in government always hide behind the rule. I'm sorry, we can't do that because there's a rule against that. And this is me as a military guy. I've always like, never let a rule make you stupid. And that's the problem in government, is we stand behind rules that shouldn't have been there in the first place instead of getting rid of the rules. We need to get rid of the regulation, the red tape, the stuff that holds us back from being the most dynamic country in the world. We used to lead the world with Russia on space travel, on computer generation, on all the leading technologies of the world that nobody else could even touch. Now we have one person putting more spaceships in outer space than all the other countries combined. We haven't seen this since the days of Pompeii and Rome, where one man could raise his own army, buy his own consularship, and control government. Those days have come back. Thank God for NVIDIA. And I mean that sincerely. Without private industry, we'd be lost in this race. We as a country are not investing in the future of technology, except for in the military, maybe. That's about it. Because other than that, about 65% of our budget is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and growing, by the way. And don't forget the $1 trillion we're spending on interest payments on debt, which is consuming more and more. We're about to go up in interest payments. The more and more of that $7 trillion budget that's consumed by non-discretionary spending, the less you have left over for everything else that is the future of world technologies and economy.
Have you shared these ideas with the president?
The president leans on me heavily, I got to tell you. I will say I'm a throwback to, I'll tell you about one of my favorite presidents, Calvin Coolidge, 100 years ago, said the business of America is business. He couldn't have been more right, because with business, you have technology, you have advancement, you have everybody's lifestyle increases. That's the future, and if the president's focused on that, he'll do well.
Let me get one question here from my friend Rishi. You got a good question, Rishi? I hope so. You don't sound confident in your own question. This is Rishi Iyengar, who's the top tech correspondent for Foreign Policy magazine.
Yeah, hi. Congressman, thanks for doing this. My question is about, obviously we've talked a lot about the US-China relationship. There's a trade deal seemingly close.
You're going to ask about what about India, right?
I mean, if you want to take
See,
a crack
I knew
at
you were
India,
going to say,
sure.
you got to be less predictable. Okay, what about India?
But I want to ask, what do you hope that the US and this administration doesn't give away in the trade deal with China, and what are you most worried they might give away?
Oh, that's a great question.
So it is, and I'll tell you, I'm also the chair of the India caucus. So we can talk all day on that. I just got
Not now, though.
Just got back from South Korea, Thailand, and Cambodia. If you don't think I'm laser focused on the Indo-PACOM region, you're mistaken. If you look at China and our relationship with China, we have to keep our leverage. I mean, they're consuming a huge amount of energy from Russia. They're competing with us on everything, and they've cheated since been a part of the World Trade Organization. They've cheated their way to the top. They've grown their economy from about a $5 trillion to almost a $20 trillion economy, GDP, and they're not doing it in a good way. Every time we sue them in the WTO, they just get better. As they lose, they get better at cheating. And the way that they're reconnoitering the prime metals and resources to look to the future, the way that they're cornering slave marketing from the west portion of their country, the way they're monopolizing other countries, the way they're going after Cambodia and other countries to isolate us. And by the way, here's the one big thing. Here's the take home. We cannot be isolationism. As Reagan said, isolationism never was and never will be the answer to an expansionist tyrannical government. And if we don't stay involved with other countries and we don't stay involved internationally, we will be a thing of the past. Just like China in the 15th century, they circumnavigated the world before Magellan, and then they became obsolete when they became isolationists. That could be us. We have to be careful.
Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Rich McCormick, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I'll see you soon. Great to see you. Thank you very much. I'll see you Thursday.
Look forward to it. Thanks.
Okay, now let me welcome to the stage Michael Lutz. We already heard a little bit this morning from him. Michael Lutz, Vice President of Global Trade Compliance of NVIDIA. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
You still have that tie on.
Yeah.
You told me it's the first time you've worn a tie in for like years.
Yep.
Why did you choose this morning?
Just because it's such an important event,
Well,
and it's groundbreaking. So.
Let me ask you and start this, because I think the thing that I find most missing in the debate about AI, its importance, these big geostrategic issues, is the one of why it matters. Like, what are the transformations in the world, in our country, in our lives? Can you tell us that story? Can you paint a picture of what AI means?
Well, if you look at what AI is going to do, it's the platform of every industry, because AI is becoming sort of like electricity. Every industry will use it. Every industry will be able to take the smarts from AI. You put data and you put electricity into a data center, and you get what are called tokens, but it's really intelligence. It makes you do things better. So it'll be, if you remember back when Google first came out, you used to be able to have an argument with somebody for a half hour over, oh, where did that actor play before? But then Google came out and you could look it up and see, and you ended the argument because you actually had access to information. Now you're going to have access to smarts, like being able to do things like 10x, 100x, 1000x of just getting information. So it's going to transform everything. And AI is going to be the basis for the 6G telecommunications. It's where scientific discoveries are going to happen. It's where business productivity, the platform for that, and untold, every industry will be affected. As we said earlier, you won't be displaced by AI. You will be displaced by somebody who uses AI, and that'll happen to companies. If you don't know how to use AI to speed up, cut costs, and do that, you'll be displaced by a new company that does do that.
So I say this respectfully. How do I get it out right? I say this respectfully, but I would never want your title. I mean, the vice president of global trade compliance. I'd like to be the global fund guy or the global trade guy, but compliance essentially you're having to deal with people and nations and jurisdictions with which you're trying to take this explosive technology and comply, right? I mean, sort of largely get that equation. So that must suck in some ways, right? So what are the toughest parts of that? And I ask this in a way, do the places in which you're operating, do they get the picture of what AI is going to be? Or do you find a very mixed bag of people who fear something that hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, it's all over. Probably the worst thing that's happened recently is the number of massive regulations that come out, and they tend to come out late on a Friday. And I had one experience where...
Who's the worst?
I can't say, but I had one experience where there was a news report that came out that just said a regulation is coming out, and I don't know how many people contacted me and said, what can we do? What does it mean? And I had to say, well, we actually have to wait till the regulation comes out and I get to read it before I can tell you how it affects us. So people want an answer immediately, and some of these regs are hundreds of pages long and are quite complicated, which is good for business in the sense of, export compliance lawyers have job security.
But do you find that they understand your industry?
No. That's one of the big problems. I think a lot of times the people who write the regulations don't really understand the supply chain of specific industries. So they'll write a regulation where it will shut down the whole world's supply because they didn't realize you had a warehouse in Hong Kong and now you can't move things in and out of China because Hong Kong is now part of China. So there's things that happen where you just say, if they just talked to us and tried to understand how the industry works, it would be helpful, and you see that debate going on, like with the Gaines Act a little bit, where, there's a discussion about, hey, if anybody objects or has an order in, then you can't sell outside the country. It's made it sound like, U.S. companies should have priority, but understanding how the supply chain works and how you get orders for stuff and how long it takes to fulfill those orders, you'd realize that the language written doesn't really work in terms of what the concept is of what they're saying the bill is. So,
is this decision yesterday by Chinese regulatory authorities about NVIDIA alleging that NVIDIA engaged in monopolistic practices, is that a headache for you?
Well, NVIDIA prides itself on complying with all export laws in whichever countries we do business. And me as a practitioner of export law, it's my job to help oversee that's what's happening. We're in a difficult geopolitical situation. I call it being between a big rock and a bigger rock in terms of what's going on right now. So it's...
Which is the bigger rock?
That I'm not going to say. Well, we're a U.S. company, right? So obviously, we like I said, we comply with all rules. So, but
tell us why deploying the AI stack globally matters so much. And let me frame it this way: why does it matter so much? And if it weren't to happen, do you survive?
That's a good question. What we have to understand is that countries like China and most countries in the world are not going to wait until we get our policies straight and decide what we're doing and what we're not doing. China is moving ahead, innovating. They're pushing their technology stack. Other countries aren't going to sit there and go, well, let's not touch this stuff till we let the U.S. figure out what they're going to do. Countries and companies are going to keep moving forward. They have to. And if you look at what happened like in 5G, Huawei got their equipment introduced throughout the world, And now when we communicate even with close allies, it's over Huawei equipment, and we can't get it removed from the supply chain. So if we don't get...
I don't think a lot of people know that. Can you, I mean, even allied states, can you like talk about Europe for a minute and how structurally embedded Huawei is in the system?
Like Germany, I think it's massive, and they haven't been able to pull out that equipment. And we'll have something similar happen if we don't allow our technology to be deployed worldwide, because other countries will take whatever's available. And China's, you look at their strategy, you look at what they're doing, and they've set up all their pieces indigenously, and they're collecting it all together. And how China works is they have intense competition within the country. If you look at solar panels or electric vehicles, where the companies just compete fiercely and they're not really profitable, and then they get really good, and then they expand throughout the world, and then they export their extra production everywhere and just take over the market. You can see it happening in EVs and batteries and so on. And that looks like what their strategy is in AI, and they have a national strategic interest in really helping to try to move it forward. So if we don't get our technology stack out there, China's will be out there. That's the way they're going. We have an advantage right now in that we have a complete stack. We have higher end chips. We have access to TSMC's advanced manufacturing that China doesn't have, at least not legally. They were able to slip some stuff through, but so if we don't take advantage of it, then we risk losing that, and then we'll then be in this situation where China will set the standards, and then it's China's guardrails that will take hold. And as we've heard before, there's certain topics that you won't be able to find on a Chinese model that are sensitive, and there's less perhaps protections, and so that's a serious consideration when we want to have open standards, and we want them to represent our way of government and democracy.
How would you grade the CHIPS Act now, and whether it's succeeding or not succeeding in reseeding back into the U.S. very top line TSMC-like chips? I mean, I know ASML is, you're a big provider, et cetera, which is a Dutch company based on technology that came out of Sandia National Labs. That's a long story for another day, folks. But as you kind of look at that ecosystem of America's big strategic bets, right? And you've got inconsistency between the Biden and Trump administration on what it's prioritizing. But both administrations are saying this industry matters. It's very, very important. How are you grading that process of genuinely bringing back that capacity, expertise, and creating an ecosystem of science and tech experts and capability in the United States?
Well, I actually have a soft spot in my heart for that, because back in the early to mid 80s, I was a photolithography engineer at Intel.
Oh.
Working in the fab.
You were an EUV lithography guy?
Well, there wasn't EUV
Okay.
that time. It was G-line back then.
Wow.
And we were doing 1,200 nanometers versus...
So what happened at Intel? That's another story.
That's a longer story.
Yeah.
But, so I think it's strategically important that we have advanced manufacturing capability in the U.S. I think the problem is that we don't have the workforce anymore because it became too costly. First, it was Silicon Valley. It used to be called Silicon Valley. It still is, but it was process engineers, and there was lots of manufacturing, but it became too expensive. And actually, that's when I got out of engineering and switched to fields, because I still wanted to stay in Silicon Valley, and I realized that if I stay here,
you couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I couldn't afford it, but I wouldn't be able to stay here if I stayed in engineering, because there weren't going to be any engineering jobs left in process engineering. And so we've lost the jobs. So in order to bring it back, and you've seen the difficulties Intel has had, which we won't go into now, but we don't have the trained workforce to do this, to man the fabs, and it will take years and years of constant investment in order to be able to bring it back. Because it's not a simple thing like, oh, look how long the Intel fabs are taking in Ohio. Now they're slated for 2030. And this is a company that's already manufacturing here. So it really will take a sustained, massive amount of effort. And one bill that is $50 billion and covers.
And 5 years in the NVIDIA world is like 100 years in normal time, right?
It moves fast, yeah.
So I mean, one of my questions to ask you, and then I'm going to go to a friend to ask you a question, is, how do you know what are going to be the benchmarks for you, Michael, in 2030, as you said that, of whether we are actually making progress and winning this geostrategic, geoeconomic race, or whether we're losing?
So it's a good question. There's a lot of different levels. So 2030, there should be $3 to $4 trillion of data center spend. So that's the high level. Is that actually happening? And then you have the are we succeeding at both a operational level and from a strategic level? So from a strategy, are we building enough data centers in the U.S.? Are we making sure we're innovating fast enough? From a success of the U.S., I would look at, are we still on the same cadence for new product development? Are the U.S. companies that are in the supply chain, whether it's chip design, whether it's the networking, whether it's the integrators, the OEMs that put the servers together, are they all successful and doing better financially?
Right.
Do we still have the same market share of the overall world market that we have now? Are we still building half the total computing capacity in the world in the U.S.? Those would be the metrics I'd look at. And the financial, are the U.S. companies benefiting financially? Because in the end, it's both national security and economic security. Economic growth leads to national security, because the countries that have the best economies also have the most money to spend on military.
So you heard it there, 3 to 4 trillion in 5 years. So that's a huge number.
Yep.
I mean, again, the G7, you got to be $1 trillion economy. So you're saying 3 or 4x that just to be a G7 nation. So that's a lot of money. Greg Bowman. Greg Bowman is with Siemens.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your partnership with Siemens and what NVIDIA does with us. And Steve, thank you for hosting
Do you like
this.
Siemens as a partner?
We love you. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Thank you for hosting this. One of the key questions, I think, as you look at AI, you all dominate about 80 to 90% of the AI market right now. One of the areas that we see as a fascinating area that seems to impact all the folks you supply is energy. What is NVIDIA seeing as all these data centers go up around the world? What are you seeing from an energy standpoint that NVIDIA can support?
And can I just do an ad? Because I'm doing a thing with the president of Siemens USA next week in New York. It is next week, right?
Yes, sir.
Next week. Mm-hmm. And we do this thing on industrial AI, AI for real energy. So if any of you are in New York and want to come to a really good event, send me a note, because this will be good with Barbara Humpton. So there's your ad. So back to Greg's question.
So I think one of the things that we could really use partnership with the government, where the government can really help, is, to be able to build a data center, you need energy, you need water, you need fast permitting. And that's something that we really need to focus on. And I think we should be looking at any energy source we can, nuclear, renewable, gas, whatever it takes to really be able to build fast enough. And rather than just focus on they should all be this or they should all be that, we should do whatever we can. Where we can use renewable, we should use renewable. But helping that process move along, because I think that's going to be the limiter in terms of capacity. Because if you look at...
is there a sustainability cost?
Well, I think AI will help solve some of the problems that we might temporarily create. But if you look at China, they have, I think I read where it was 2x the amount of capacity and electricity than they need. And the U.S. is at a small enough margin that we oftentimes exceed the capacity. So we're just behind in that area, and we have to do what we can to catch up.
Well, we have one more segment of this show. Michael, I want to thank you for hosting us today, hosting us for breakfast. Michael Lutz, Vice President of Global Trade Compliance.
Thank you.
NVIDIA. Michael, thank you so
Thanks.
much. All right, we're going to bring another chair up here. I've been told to go off the stage, but I'm not going to do that. Just, okay. All this is Taylor, by the way. He did everything this morning with the team. Okay. How you doing? People having fun? Karen, awake? Jane? Give it a grade. B? A? AI. AI. She wins. She wins. Let me invite to the stage now my friend Samm Sachs. She's Senior Fellow at Future Security at New America and Senior Fellow of the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale Law School. Samm, great to see you. And Neil Chilson, who's the Head of AI Policy at the Abundance Institute. Neil, great to see you this morning. I hope you guys have heard all the stuff we've been kind of talking about this morning. Fascinating set of legislators. I think we have a sense that this is a tense moment, if you will, in America's technology story. NVIDIA has hosted us this morning to kind of think big about this moment. And so, Samm, part of this is really the U.S.-China competition. And I have argued for a long time that decisions were made 30 years ago or so. I've talked to Bob Lighthizer a lot about this, that fused the U.S. economy so deeply into China that it's very, very hard and very disruptive and costly to pretend that that's not there anymore, to decouple completely. And you may disagree with that, I don't know. But I am interested as we sort of look in that context at that ecosystem of both development and competition, how you see the equilibrium and the equities that we should most care about as a nation.
Steve, I completely agree, and it's one of the reasons why the idea of a Cold War just doesn't hold up. We are too enmeshed. But I think just from a geopolitical lens, we are at an inflection point in 3 areas. I mean, one is the U.S.-China relationship is undergoing a massive reset. I mean, in Madrid this week, we may have a TikTok deal, right? And so tech has been at the center of what is actually a broader reset in how the U.S. and China are thinking about coexisting in a world where technology, where investment is so intertwined. So that's one. The second, and this happened over the summer, there was this collision where both the US and China, within 3 days of each other, announced dueling AI action plans. And I was actually in Shanghai when the Trump American AI action plan dropped, right? And so you have these 2 competing visions of riding the wave of global AI leadership from Beijing. And actually, I would say because it's also bottom up, it's also not just in Beijing, right? It's in Shenzhen, it's in Hangzhou. So how do we think about these competing visions for global leadership? And the third, and this has come out in some of the earlier discussions so far, is I think there's a live, unresolved debate about where do we draw the line when it comes to access to US technology in China. It's not so clear, right? I think some people want to make this black and white. A full-on blockade of US technology is the way to maintain US technological leadership. And I think what's come to a head also this summer, everything happened this summer around the H20 chips, is there actually is not a consensus. It's not just a black and white, economic versus national security
Just
argument.
for our audience, these were the chips that NVIDIA was going to make and be allowed to sell into China.
Correct. And so NVIDIA got a license to sell. And I was actually in China when the news broke. And I heard on the ground, people were saying, actually, we don't want these chips now. And there's been a whole debacle because national security hawks in China say, well, maybe there's security flaws. And actually the reason, and I think it's less about that, I think they recognized that when they were forced to go it alone, it turbocharged their own domestic capabilities. And we can talk more about that.
Well, let me ask you both about the administration's AI plan of action, which, I read it. It's very robust. It basically calls on a lot of actions across this. It's probably too soon to judge where this, and honestly, I was impressed with the scope and scale and thinking, even about the science ecosystem, because I sometimes wonder about decisions of the Trump administration on whether they believe. But that report very clearly says, hey, we need to be leaders in science. But from the Abundance Institute's perspective on this, how would you what equities do we need to make sure we get right? And I also just think sometimes the problem with industrial policy is people focus on 1 or 2 or 3 things, and they don't understand you need like 70 things to go right. And I'm just interested in sort of look at this competition. Do we have that sensibility?
Yeah, so I think maybe in AI it's even broader. We need like 700 things to go right. It's a general purpose technology.
Understated it. Yeah.
So it's deployed, it'll be deployed across all industries, across all ecosystems, across the world. And so I think the AI action plan, kind of continued the reversal from the Biden approach, which was one of sort of, let's just make it and build it here, and let's think about the frontier models like almost exclusively. Let's not spend much time thinking about like deployment. The AI action plan like runs through that whole approach. It's not just about supporting the ability of U.S. companies, which lead the world in built it first, build it best. They build it the most efficient, but with a very close follow from China on a bunch of these spaces. It's not just about building those frontier models, but it's about like how do we make sure that this delivers benefits to the American people, and that's really the orientation of the AI action plan. We're not going to manage it so much here in DC, but we want to facilitate the creation of this technology and the deployment across the U.S. And I think sometimes when we talk about an AI race,
right.
It seems like people are talking about multiple different races, right? So a lot of the conversation in the U.S. really does focus on these frontier models, right? Like who's got the biggest, best, latest model. I think China is looking at how do we deploy this stuff to make sure that we maintain economic growth. And they're thinking about that not just in China, they're thinking about that globally. And
Neil, I should have done this a lot earlier because we would talk about AI stack in a way that we just presume everybody knows what that means. Remember my friend Jim McKelvey wrote a book on the stack that he did with Square and how they beat Amazon, et cetera. Can you kind of disaggregate what an AI stack means, why it's so important in this conversation, and how, what will it look like and feel like if you're deploying that AI stack?
Yeah, so the AI stack is just the whole, you can just think of it as all the hardware and software components that you would need to deliver an AI service, right? And so that's everything from the chips and the racks that they go into, the memory that's part of that, the communications networks that are part of that, the hardware devices that keep them cool and in that environment, and then all the way, that's the hardware side, and then you move up, to some of the firmware, the structures that people use to program these, to program applications that are on that. NVIDIA's is CUDA, things like that. And then on top of that, you have the applications. And so that whole stack is something that, those ecosystems could be developed separately and then integrated, or they can be developed as a whole and delivered. And I think one of the great things about the U.S. is that we have the capability to do all of those pieces. And we could deliver a stack that
Does anybody go to the web summits, any of the web summits, like Lisbon, Rio? Rishi does. Yeah, I see you there. You guys got to go. Lisbon, Vancouver, Rio, Doha, there are all these web summits where literally tens of thousands, 100,000 in Lisbon are coming together. And it's all the software, digital people. And I'm just sort of interested, Sam, you've been to them, right, before you've done the I mean, I sort of want to go through, when I go there this year, I'm going to be looking for the competing stacks. Like I'm going to see how good is the U.S. stack, NVIDIA stack versus the other, because everyone is there, right? So can you kind of help us unpack that as well?
Sure. I mean, I think, and this raises this other question, right? How the stated objective is the U.S. wants to export the full stack to allies.
Right.
So how do we actually do that? And when I was in China this summer, I saw the full stack on display.
Well, I think the U.S. wants to export to allies and others.
Right. Well,
right.
And this is the question, right? I think the Biden administration phrased it as we want to have democratic AI. And what's become clear, I think this is a sort of fault line, is, well, is it just democracies, or actually there are many third country markets around the world? And how do we think about different partners in that? And how do we make sure that U.S. maintains leadership?
Did you write an article on what a silly idea that was?
I think I probably said it a few times.
I see, okay. When it comes to like the national security dimensions, which is really the flavor, I think, what's been really interesting, is to watch serious economy. If you talk to Christine Lagarde, President of the European Central Bank, a few years ago, she said, the biggest challenge for her is to think about the fact that the national security vector has now entered economic decision making. And there are opportunities and real costs in that. There are costs, when it comes to growth, it comes to these areas. But I'm just interested, Neil, how do you get those equilibriums right? And in this case with very, very advanced technology that's so fundamental and core to this country's future in the area. But how do you, to come back to what Jane Harman and Georgette Mosbacher said, how do you not kill the golden goose?
Well, I think part of it starts with realizing that AI isn't just one thing, and that we have to have a multiplicity of approaches to the various parts of AI and how they're deployed. And so, like, by looking at what different spheres that AI can bring benefits or where they bring threats, I think we can that can help us calibrate. This has been the biggest challenge among talking both at the federal level, but I spent a lot of time talking to state legislatures in the US. This is the biggest challenge. They want a solution for AI. They want to make sure that AI is safe. And the problem is you really don't know when it's safe from a national security perspective or from a consumer experience perspective.
So what do you tell them?
Unless you're talking about what application it's
So what
being
do you
used
tell
in.
them?
So I tell them, stop thinking about it as AI generally and start thinking about what specific applications are you worried about, what specific harms are you worried about. Let's focus there. Let's look and see, do we already have frameworks to deal with those types of harms and risks in, say, transportation or healthcare? And then let's apply those, and if there's gaps, let's figure out how to fill those. And so it's not an easy answer, it's not a silver bullet answer, but I think it's the right answer, and I think it's the right calibration, including on some of these national security policy issues.
Sam, what do you think the most important, I know this sounds as trite, but what is the most important thing we have to get right now in the global AI race? I mean, you've heard Vladimir Putin, you've heard Elon Musk, you've heard Xi Jinping. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia and current ambassador, says Xi Jinping wakes up every morning, I don't know if it's true, and says, where are we in the AI race today? And what have we done for me on AI? I mean, it's clearly something that matters to other leaders and their commentators. What does the United States have to get, most right at this moment in this race?
So many people talk about running faster, but I don't think we've actually put sophisticated thinking into what that means, right? And so, Senator Rounds this morning talked about having a science agenda, investing in the energy capacity, high quality data sets. These are actually all things that are in the American AI Action Plan, which I thought in many ways was quite thoughtful about thinking about the role of government. But then we also need to think about the ripple effects of our actions. The competition between the US and China is not just happening in each other's countries. In fact, I would say it's not even happening in each other's countries anymore at all. It's more decoupled. It's happening in Latin America, in Africa. It's happening in third country markets in Southeast Asia. So how do we enable US firms to most effectively compete against Chinese firms in, say, cloud computing, right? It's also about thinking, where do we want to be smart about the restrictions? And I don't just mean in terms of the tech to China, but what is the role of guardrails? Can we think about federal privacy law as an example, that existing sectors already have some guardrails that we could make use of? So these are all the different tools that go into this. And I think, frankly, Xi Jinping, maybe not him himself, but his senior officials are thinking about these aspects of it. And we need to be comprehensive too.
Somebody got to wink at me for one last question before we go. Let me ask you a tough question, Neil, here. I'm interested in what China is getting right. I listen to Jensen Huang, read everything Jensen says, and try to understand it. And he has a real, I don't know if it's respect, appreciation, understanding that what China's built is a juggernaut, and that we ought not to take it too lightly. And I'm really interested in what we as a nation need to learn or could learn, because I just remember the days where China was looked at as a command and control economy, that the central party, the central committee of the party was too incompetent, that you see the squeeze of business leaders in China that's going on right now. I have some friends that have talked to me about that in the audience now, and that this is going to lead to China's downfall at some level and its lack of competitiveness. But on any measure, China has done extraordinarily well in moving up that ladder in a way that really blindsided modern democratic market economies, because it wasn't supposed to work. So I'm just interested as sort of looking, and Jensen says, hey, they're 6 months behind. What could we learn from them in this process?
So I think what China has gotten right, so, technology, at the Abundance Institute, we believe technology is a primary driver of widespread human prosperity. But that's just not like policy driven, it's not just entrepreneur driven, it's also culturally driven. And so I think what China has gotten right, and where the US has historically led on this, but maybe has gotten a little worse at it, China likes technology, right? They like their tech companies. And now the US right now is in a
If they don't become too powerful.
Well, powerful companies are useful, right? In many ways. And so the question is, as long as they're facing market forces, I think that powerful companies is great. So what China's gotten right is that they hold up their tech companies as important for the future of the country, and in a way that's reached, I think, the baser culture that people want tech to succeed in
Sam,
China.
a quick thought?
The Chinese government and the bottom up, the private sector, they're thinking about AI as an economic tool, not just a technology. How can they make use of it to make people's lives better? Really practical applications. And I think that's something where they aren't even thinking about the United States, frankly, in that regard. How can they run ahead?
Quick question, right here, okay. Nihal Krishan.
Hey, Nihal here, AI and Tech Policy Scholar with CFR. My question is on energy infrastructure. So again and again throughout this morning, we've heard about energy infrastructure being a key linchpin and blockade for us in the AI race. And so, potential solutions we've talked about are permitting reform, better coordination between federal, state, and local. I'm curious, what do you see? Representative McCormick talked about a crisis and an emergency moving things forward. What crisis or emergency do we need in Washington to have the movement on AI energy infrastructure on both sides to move ahead to where we want?
I feel like people, it has not been repeated enough, the bullet points of how fast China can deploy energy. China has more solar energy capacity right now than the US has nuclear energy generation capacity. I think that factoid, nobody in DC really knows that, right? And so that's the type of comparison I think that's really important. Now, per capita, we still consume a lot more energy, but their inputs and their ability to build is much better than ours. And so there's a lot of structural reforms that I think need to happen. You listed out some of them, but it's going to take a lot of work in the US to get there. That needs to start now. And part of that is telling the story about the difference between the ability of China's to build energy and
Sam,
the
final word.
Let's actually forget about China and just focus on ourselves. How can we get better in ways we don't always have to invoke China to trigger domestic action?
That's a wonderful comment. I often, when I talk to legislators that were going through a few years ago, the hyperventilation mode and the anger mode and the flustering and blowing up like a blowfish mode. And I said, well, what are you doing to invest in our own capacity to do this? And I think it was a very, very wise comment. So, but there are lots of views and perspectives on that. So let me thank you both, Sam Sachs of Yale Law School and New America, and Neil Chilson of the Abundance Institute. Thank you both very much. Michael Lutz is going to come up here and say a few words. I just want to say my words of thanks to both of you and to all of our speakers and to everyone that joined us this morning. And I want to thank NVIDIA. I mean, this is. I mean, you never know. I mean, roll the dice and have a morning session and hope it goes well. Hope somebody will show up. Wow, did you guys show up? So thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Neil. Okay, Michael, over to you.
Okay. Hello. Okay. Hopefully you're not tired of seeing me. So, on behalf of NVIDIA, I want to thank everybody for spending the last couple of hours talking about this. As we've heard, it's a really important topic and very timely. Both how do we make sure the U.S. is continuing to innovate and keep our leadership, and how do we make sure we can deploy our technology stack throughout the world. I have an analogy I think I want to use that I thought about with the way the rules have worked before. We put in a set of rules, restricted GPU and accelerator chips, and then we started driving by focusing on the rearview mirror. What did China do? Okay, let's double down. Let's remove the I/O parameter. Let's change the computing threshold. What about memory bandwidth? Which country? And finally, it culminated with what was called the AI diffusion rule, I call it the AI non-diffusion rule because it listed 19 countries, fortunately the US was one of them, that could get access to the most advanced chips. That's not diffusion, that's non-diffusion. So we told the world we're not a reliable supplier. Or you can be on one of these bad lists, or you can be one of these countries in country group whatever, D, A, whatever, and you're not going to get chips. So that's not the way you win this war, you know, and we have to balance national security concerns and economic benefits so that we make the right policy choices and so that we make sure we win the stack war, if you will, make sure our technology is the one that's used throughout the world. So I hope we can work together to try to craft the right policies so that we can be successful and win. And so, again, thank you for coming and spending the time here today. It's been a great discussion. Appreciate all the comments and questions. So thank you again.